Each morning, as the clock struck precisely 7 a.m., the quiet neighborhood beheld the same impossible spectacle. A small 5-year-old child leading 5 colossal German shepherds, her stride confident as if she owned the world. Some offered a gentle smile, while others filmed her true identity was a profound mystery. Whispers circulated. Who were those powerful dogs, and where were her parents, and how could one so small command them with such flawless grace? But the truth remained locked away. For the little girl offered no answers. She simply walked, each and every morning, same time, same path, same quiet resolve, until one day a curious passerby finally chose to follow, and his discovery would leave everyone utterly speechless. What was she concealing? Behind that innocent gaze, stay with us, for the truth that unfolds will leave you breathless. Before we reveal it all, show your support with a like, a share, and by subscribing. I'm genuinely curious, where's this story reaching you? Let me know your country in the comments below. It's incredible to see how far these tales travel. The city was still slumbering when the faint echo of soft footsteps drifted down Maple Street. A low-hanging mist bled the rising sun into a muted orange haze, and through that silent veil emerged a vision the neighborhood had come to expect, but could never truly comprehend. A small girl, surely no older than 6, moved with a quiet calm. Along the pavement, her bright pink coat a stark, elegant contrast to the raw morning chill. Yet it wasn't the coat that commanded every gaze. It was her escort, 5 magnificent, full-grown German shepherds, their leashes held gently in her small hands, pacing in flawless sync at her side like a loyal honor guard, answering an unspoken command. She was always alone, a child with no known origin on a journey to an unknown destination. Each morning at 7 a.m. on the dot, she would emerge, tracing the familiar streets, following her unwavering path, before vanishing around the bend just as the first church bell tolled. Then, as though she and her pack had simply dissolved into the mist, the street would resume its ordinary cadence. Townspeople would trade hushed theories about her. Some believed she was the child of a fallen trainer who gave his life in service. Others swore the dogs were police canines and she was their appointed caretaker. But none of the stories could ever explain the profound authority this small child held over 5 formidable shepherds. Even the powerful animals themselves seemed to enforce an invisible boundary warning, all to keep their distance. One dawn, old Mr. Harper, the shopkeeper, sweeping his sidewalk in the early light, offered her a kind greeting. "Good morning there, little one," he called warmly. But before a sound could escape her lips, the shepherds formed a living wall, their gazes fixed on him with a silent warning that rooted him to the spot. The girl remained silent. With a subtle tilt of her head and a soft whistle, the formation broke, and they continued on, leaving, the old man watching his broom frozen halfway through its sweep. It wasn't long before people began to secretly record her daily procession. From behind their curtains, footage of the little girl and her 5 enormous guardians soon went viral. To some, she was the dog princess. Others mused that she was raising a secret canine army. But under the humor lay a deepening current of wonder and apprehension, because upon closer inspection you'd see they weren't just walking beside her, they were her vigilant protectors. Every few paces, one of them would check their rear flank. Another scanned the path ahead. If a car veered too near, their powerful bodies would instantly tense, poised to defend her in a heartbeat. Yet the little girl never flinched, never smiled, never spoke, always bearing that same, a serene yet haunting look that settled deep in her eyes. One dawn, as sunlight spilled over the brick facades and the air awoke, to the symphony of birds and distant barks, a newcomer named Ethan Cole observed from his balcony. He had only just arrived in the neighborhood and was witnessing the unbelievable. A little girl commanding 5 shepherds, utterly fearless. It defied all logic. The scene was too perfect, too orchestrated, and deeply unsettling. He reached for his camera and captured the moment, oblivious that this single frame would ignite a firestorm unearthing a secret the entire town had been blind to for years. Before the week was out, her name was a whisper on every corner of Maple Street, or at least the name they'd given her. To some, she was the shepherd girl. To others, the little one with the dogs. But her true identity, her home, remained a mystery. She would just materialize at dawn, always from the same direction, and always dissolve into the fog-shrouded corner by the old elm. The video Ethan posted ignited the internet. Overnight, millions stared in awe as this tiny child led 5 formidable German shepherds through a bustling intersection, their bodies a shield of unwavering loyalty. The comments erupted with wild speculation. Some were touching, others deeply unsettling. She trained service animals. No, she's just a kid. Those are canines. Something is wrong. Watch their formation, they're protecting her. And so within days, the local news crews arrived on Maple Street. They staked out the corner at sunrise, desperate for a shot. But the little girl seemed to exist in a world apart. Her eyes never met a lens, her lips never uttered a word. She just walked in silence, her loyal dogs beside her, heads held high like a commander and her troops. Behind curtains, the neighbors whispered. Some were captivated, others unnerved. Mrs. Keller from the bakery swore she saw the girl whisper something in German to the dogs, and they immediately sat in perfect formation. "That child is trained," she murmured. "Or maybe she's the one doing the training." Then the mystery deepened. Someone spotted the collar tags, each one different old, worn and stamped with faded numerals like military dog tags. "Those aren't pets," a local cop murmured after, reviewing a clip. "Those are retired service animals." This discovery fueled Ethan's obsession. He rewatched, his footage frame by painstaking frame. In a close-up, he saw what everyone missed, a small faded scar on the girl's wrist, and on one dog's collar a tiny metal emblem, a police crest. The online speculation took a darker turn. Where are the parents? Who lets a kid handle dogs like that? This isn't right. But underneath the suspicion, an entire world was captivated. Each new video stirred a storm of emotion, awe, confusion, and a creeping fear. And every single morning she walked her path untouched by the chaos, her dogs a silent barricade between her and the rest of the world. From his window, Ethan whispered aloud, "What is your secret, little girl?" He had no idea he was on the verge of an answer, a truth far stranger than he could have ever imagined. Ethan Cole had seen a lot in his 35 years. Back alley crimes, disaster zones, the very worst of humanity. As a former investigative journalist, he thought he was immune to shock. But the sight of that girl and her 5 massive dogs on Maple Street each morning ignited a curiosity that had long laid dormant. At first he dismissed it as just another viral sensation. But the more he observed, the less it seemed like random chance. Every dawn the dogs moved with a surgical precision 1 at point 1, as rearguard 2 flanking her sides, and 1 always shadowing the girl like a devoted guardian. Their eyes perpetually scanned the surroundings, watchful yet composed. This wasn't instinct. This was a discipline. Ethan started rising before the sun, coffee in hand, notebook poised. From his second-story balcony, he studied every single detail. The girl's pink coat remained the same each day, a little frayed at the sleeves. Her shoes were scuffed, as if she had walked for miles far beyond this quiet neighborhood. And the dogs, their fur gleamed, their collars were well kept. But their gait, their very walk, carried duty, not playfulness. He jotted a note. These dogs have a mission. But what? Mission 1 frosty morning, his curiosity finally won. Ethan decided he would follow them. Not close enough to frighten them, but just near enough to discover their destination. He trailed a half block behind, keeping his steps soft, his camera at the ready. The little girl never once glanced back. Her tiny hand gripped the leashes with practiced resolve. They passed the bakery, the bookstore, and the park, all familiar landmarks, but then turned onto a narrow side street that led toward the edge of town, a forgotten place few people ever visited. Derelict houses lined the road, some boarded up, others long since abandoned. It was then that Ethan noticed something that made his own heart pound. The dog's entire demeanor shifted. Their ears perked, their pace slowed, and their formation tightened protectively around the girl. She looked up at the sky, whispered a word he couldn't quite hear, and the dogs were instantly at ease. That single quiet command sent a shiver down his spine. When they reached the last house on the block, she stopped. The house looked utterly forgotten. Paint was peeling. The fence was broken, its windows half covered with plastic instead of glass. But the second she stepped, through the gate, the dogs' tension just melted away. They wagged their tails gently, as if they had finally returned home. Ethan crouched behind a tree, snapping a few discreet photos. His journalistic instincts were screaming at him. A story is here. A story no one knows about. As the girl vanished inside, he heard faint barks from within. There were more dogs, maybe 2 or 3 more. He frowned. How could a child possibly manage all that alone? He turned his camera off, exhaling a white cloud of cold air. "All right," he murmured, his eyes locked on the old house. "Let's find out just who you are." He didn't realize it then, but that single decision to follow her was about to unravel a mystery far deeper than any he had ever investigated before. The next morning, Ethan parked his car several streets away from the old, dilapidated house. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the rooftops gold as the city stirred to life. He sat in silence, watching through his windshield, waiting, and just as the church clock struck 7, the rusted gate groaned open. There she was again, the little girl in the pink coat, her braids swinging as she stepped out with her 5 devoted German shepherds. They moved like shadows at her side, synchronized and completely silent. The sight was hypnotic, a child so small, surrounded by protectors, so very fierce. Ethan slipped out of his car and followed at a safe distance. He noticed how each dog seemed to have a specific duty. The biggest, a scarred collar marking his past, flanked her right, constantly watching the road. Ahead, a younger one kept pace on her left, gently bumping her hand with his nose, a silent question, asking if she was all right. As a truck thundered past, a sharp bark rang out, and all 5 moved as one, forming a living shield before her. Ethan's breath caught. Their action was fluid, a drilled maneuver, not a frantic pack. These were not just pets, they were a unit. Then her voice, a soft whisper, "It's okay." And in an instant, their forms eased. Ethan saw it, then the tension melting from their frames at her word, their hardened eyes softening with a deep devotion. A breathtaking loyalty that defied every ordinary thing he knew. In the park, she took a bench, and her guardians formed a silent crescent around her. They didn't stray, didn't chase. The squirrels. They held their post, vigilant but serene. From a small lunchbox, the girl carefully drew out pieces of bread, not for her, but for them. She offered it to each one with a gentle touch, a murmured secret he couldn't quite hear. But the meaning was clear. A knot formed in Ethan's chest, not fear, not pity, but something far deeper. This was no ordinary child, pretending to be brave. This was a soul bearing a burden too immense for her years. As a nearby jogger came too close, one of the pack rose without a sound, a silent wall in his path. The runner gave a nervous laugh and quickly backed away. And Ethan saw it again, that unspoken pact, the profound connection between the child and her sentinels. Later, as they walked, homeward, a realization escaped Ethan's lips. "You're not walking them. They're walking you." But he had no idea. Not yet. The true reason for their unbreakable bond was rooted in a sorrow far deeper than anyone could ever comprehend. Imagine. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind where sunlight splintered on glass, and the air held the faint scent of morning dew and exhaust. The little girl traced her familiar path, her 5 German shepherds moving like shadows. At her side, her loyal sentinels. The day felt ordinary until suddenly it shattered. Ethan watched from across the street, his camera hidden, feigning interest in his phone. For days he'd been chronicling her quiet procession, each step drawing him deeper into her enigma. But this morning a strange new tension crackled in the air, a feeling even he could sense. Her pack was on edge, their ears swiveling at every whisper of sound, their heads snapping around, as if tracking an unseen threat. And then it came. A savage roar erupted from behind them, a motorcycle moving much too fast down the narrow street. The rider hugged the curb, his careless laughter swallowed by the screaming of the engine itself. The little girl stood paralyzed, her eyes wide with terror. Before a warning could even form on Ethan's lips, her protectors exploded into action. The Alpha, the one with the scarred collar, surged forward, putting his own body directly between his girl and the roaring machine. 2 more flanked him instantly, a living barricade of flesh and loyalty. Tires shrieked as the rider wrenched the bike aside, missing them by inches before slamming into a trash can and spilling over. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he sprinted across the street. "Are you okay?" he yelled, but the words caught in his throat. The pack pivoted, creating a wall between him and the girl, their teeth bared, just enough to warn him away. The biker groaned, starting to pull his helmet, but before a curse could escape his lips, a low, rumbling growl from one of the shepherds sent him staggering back. Little girl knelt beside her lead dog, her small hands shaking as she buried them in his thick fur. "Shh, it's okay. Bravo," she whispered, her voice a fragile breath. "You were so good, Bravo." The name struck Ethan like a flash of lightning. That wasn't some cute nickname, it was a professional call sign, the kind he knew police and military handlers used. He took a deliberate step closer. "You should get home, kid. That was too close." The girl finally lifted her head. Her eyes held a haunting fusion of childhood innocence, raw fear, and something deeper. A profound sorrow. "We're fine," she murmured, her voice almost lost to the wind. Then her gaze fell upon a small tear in her sleeve, and she quickly yanked it down, concealing whatever lay beneath. But for a fleeting instant, Ethan saw it. A faint mark on her arm, something like an old burn or a surgical scar. Before he could form the question, the dogs barked again, herding her away from the chaos. In a matter of seconds, she vanished around the corner, swallowed by the city, leaving Ethan frozen in place, his heart pounding as a storm of questions raged in his mind. The biker muttered a curse and limped away, but Ethan didn't even register his departure. His mind was seared with a single impossible image, a small child in command of 5 trained shepherds who would lay down their lives for her without a moment's hesitation. He murmured the words aloud. "Bravo, a service dog. Scars. Secrets." His eyes narrowed. "There's so much more to you than anyone understands, little one." As he walked back to his car, the distant sound of barking echoed after him through the crisp morning air. It wasn't a sound of anger or fear, but of steadfast, loyal protection. And in that echo, Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was no longer just chasing a mystery. He was stepping directly into its heart. That night, sleep offered Ethan no escape. Every time he shut his eyes, the image of that scar flashed in the darkness, and he heard the ghost of her whisper, "You were so good, Bravo." The name reverberated in his soul, an unsolved riddle that wouldn't let him rest. By dawn, he found himself drawn back to the edge of town, parked across the street from that same dilapidated house. The entire neighborhood was shrouded in a thick morning fog. Paint was peeling from the wooden siding in tired strips. The roof bowed in the center, and the fence listed forward as if it had finally given up the will to stand. Yet from within the broken home came the faintest sounds of life, a soft bark, a low whine, then stillness. He waited until she emerged for her morning walk. The moment she and her canine protectors vanished down the road, Ethan moved. He crossed the street every instinct, screaming at him not to trespass, but the need to know was a force stronger than caution. Up close, the neglect was staggering, mud-caked. The windows, the mailbox was a rusted anonymous sentinel, and countless paw prints marked the earth like the signatures of faithful ghosts. He circled to the back, treading carefully through overgrown weeds until he came upon a small open shed. A quick glance inside revealed empty food bags, tattered, blankets, and a pile of frayed leashes. The air hung heavy with the scent of antiseptic and dog shampoo, and then his eyes fell on a wooden crate hidden in the far corner. A thick layer of dust coated its lid, but stenciled in faded black paint were 3 words that made his blood run cold: K9 unit property of Metro Police. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. So Mrs. Keller was right all along. These were not just ordinary dogs. They were highly trained military, or more likely retired police canines. But how did a little girl end up with 5 of them? A sharp bark shattered the silence, making him flinch. He spun around, his eyes locking on a dark shadow in the doorway. It wasn't a person, but another dog, older with a noticeable limp, and a muzzle silvered with age. The dog simply stared at him for a long moment, and retreated into the house, the door groaning shut behind it. Ethan recoiled, his heart pounding. There had to be more dogs, inside, perhaps wounded or just concealed. He raised his phone, zooming in on the weathered front window. Through the sheer, thin curtain he saw a fleeting image, the gentle flicker of a lamp, a line of polished steel bowls, and what seemed to be a folded police uniform laid across a chair. "Who's really protecting who, kid?" he murmured. As he melted back into the mist, a low, warning growl from a vigilant shepherd shadowed him from the fence. He couldn't have known then that when he next returned, he would not be coming alone, and the secret held within that decaying house was about to break. It didn't take long for the escalating attention to attract the wrong kind of notice. The viral videos, the neighborhood, murmurs, the mounting curiosity. It all culminated in a call from someone convinced they were doing the right thing. Less than a week later, a white van from the city's animal control department rolled to a stop before the girl's home. Ethan watched from his hiding place across the street, a knot tightening in his stomach. He had no idea what they'd find in there, but a deep foreboding told him this would not end well. 2 officers emerged. One clutched a clipboard while his partner adjusted a tranquilizer gun on his hip. The younger one sighed. 5 shepherds in a kid's care. That's not safe. We'll have no choice but to take them if a guardian doesn't show. The front gate groaned open as they advanced. Instantly, the barking erupted, deep, thunderous, and commanding. The very sound shook the air. In moments, 5 German shepherds materialized at the fence line, hackles raised, their eyes blazing with a warning. "Whoa," the senior officer breathed. "That's formation. They're guarding, not attacking." Still, he risked a single, cautious step forward, and that was all it took. The largest dog, Bravo, surged against the gate, his teeth bared. The officers froze. Then, cutting through the chaos, the little girl emerged in the doorway. Her pink coat was faded, her face pale, but her eyes held a fierce resolve. "Stop," she commanded. At once, all 5 dogs fell back, returning to her side like a loyal honor guard. Her small hand came to rest on Bravo's head as she murmured, "It's all right. They don't mean us any harm." An officer cleared his throat. "Little miss, are your folks home?" She slowly shook her head. "It's just us." The younger officer's expression softened, but his voice stayed firm. "We've had calls, honey. People are concerned. You can't handle this many dogs alone." Tears welled in her eyes. "Please, don't take them," she whispered. "They are all I have left." Behind her, Ethan could see shapes, stirring. More dogs, older ones, peering from the shadows inside. His camera trembled slightly in his hands. Tante, senior officer, sighed. "We have to report this," he said gently. "We will be back tomorrow with child services." As they turned to leave, Bravo growled low, his body tensed. The girl knelt beside him, her own voice trembling. "Shh. Don't you worry, boys. I won't let them take you." From his hiding spot, Ethan clenched his jaw. He knew he could not remain a silent observer any longer. Tomorrow when they came back, he'd have to choose stand by or step in to protect the girl and her secret. That very night, the sky tore open. Wind howled down Maple Street like an angry spirit, rattling window panes and ripping branches from trees. The rain came down in sheets, pounding the pavement, transforming the quiet neighborhood into a maelstrom of strobing light and percussive thunder. Ethan was frozen at his window, gazing into the tempest, unable to shake the image of the girl, the raw terror in her voice as she pleaded, "They're all I have left." He knew animal control was scheduled to return the next morning, but a gnawing intuition told him something terrible would happen before then. He checked his watch. 7 p.m. The street was a river of rain, utterly devoid of life. No sign of the child or her dogs. On any other night he'd see them, on their pilgrimage near the old church. But tonight, the world beyond his window was a ghost town. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the far end of the road and the skeletal frame of that derelict house defiant against the storm's fury. Then, through the relentless downpour, his eyes caught it, the gate swinging violently, hanging broken from its hinge. A cold dread seized him. Without a second's hesitation, he threw on his coat and plunged into the storm. Every step was a battle against the gale, the rain 1,000 stinging needles against his face, but his resolve was unbreakable. As he fought his way closer, he heard a faint, desperate barking. The cries grew stronger with each stride until he was on the porch. "Hello," he yelled over the tempest. The only answer was the frantic clawing of paws against the door. He shoved, but it was locked. He kicked again. The frame splintered with a sickening crack, and he fell inside. The scent assaulted him, first damp earth, wet fur, and the metallic tang of fear. His flashlight beam trembled. It cut through the gloom, revealing torn blankets, empty bowls, a dying lamp, and then a flicker of movement. From the shadows of a ruined couch, Bravo emerged, soaked and shivering, his eyes wild with desperation. But instead of a warning bark, he turned toward the dark hallway and let out a heart-wrenching whine Ethan had never heard. It wasn't aggression, it was a plea. "Where is she?" Ethan whispered, following the dog into the blackness, his boots splashing through pools of water on the warped floorboards. A flash of lightning seared the corridor, and there she was, the little girl curled beside two of her guardians, clutching a flashlight whose light had long since been extinguished. Her small pink coat was drenched, her lips a pale, chilling blue. "Sir? Hey, I'm here." Ethan knelt beside her, his fingers finding a pulse. Faint, but it was there. The dogs growled. Softly, their bodies tense until a single sharp bark from Bravo silenced them. They instantly relented. Ethan draped his own jacket around her small, shivering frame. "It's all right now, kid. You're safe." The wind howled, rattling the windows so fiercely. He was certain they would burst. He had to move her. But as he gently lifted her, his beam caught something on the floor, a picture frame lying face down. He turned it over. A man in a police uniform beamed back at him, standing with immense pride beside 5 magnificent German shepherds. The nameplate read, "Officer Daniel Carter, K9 Unit." Ethan's breath hitched. The resemblance was staggering. The girl had her father's eyes, his face. She was his. Thunder cracked, rocking the very foundations. Ethan breathed, "My God, she's his little girl!" And in that chilling instant, he understood this was no mere rescue. It was the beginning of a revelation that would shatter everything. By dawn, the storm had finally broken, leaving Maple Street cloaked in an eerie silence and the wreckage of fallen branches. But the peace was fleeting. At precisely 8 a.m., 2 squad cars and the same white animal control van converged on the old house. Officers emerged, their faces grim. Water dripped from their heavy boots, the static of their radios cutting through the damp mist. This time they were ready. Tranquilizer guns, high-beam flashlights, and a warrant authorizing a forced entry. Ethan lingered nearby, playing the part of a mere bystander while his heart hammered against his ribs with a terrible guilt. He had spirited the girl to safety hours before, to his home where she now slept wrapped in a warm blanket beside Bravo and the pack. But a desperate part of him had to see what secrets lay hidden within that house. The senior officer pounded a fist on the worn wooden door. "City Animal Control, anyone home?" Silence answered, broken only by the faint, mournful whine of dogs from deep inside. He struck the door again, his voice booming. "We have a warrant to inspect the premises." The silence that followed stretched on for an eternity, until one officer met his partner's gaze and gave a single solemn nod. The battering ram struck the door with a sickening thud that reverberated down the quiet street. The old hinges shattered and a wave of damp fur and sterile disinfectant washed over them. They moved in with caution beams from their flashlights slicing through the oppressive gloom. It was one of the younger officers who froze first. "Sir, you have to see this." Cages. Dozens of them. But they weren't prisons of wire and filth. They were clean, lined with soft blankets, some awaiting occupants, others holding injured shepherds in quiet repose. Paws were bandaged wounds meticulously stitched, fresh water in every bowl. This was not a kennel. It was a haven. "My God," the older man whispered in awe. "She's been saving them." In a far corner, wall of framed photographs laid bare the whole truth. Officers in dress uniform, K9 unit portraits, commendations. And there, at the very heart of it all, was the same brave face from the photo Ethan had discovered. Officer Daniel Carter, beaming with pride beside his K9 partners. Pinned just beside it was a worn, folded newspaper clipping. "Local K9 hero lost in the line of duty." A heavy silence fell over the officers. The staggering truth crashed down on them all at once. This was never neglect. This was a legacy. The animal control officers slowly lowered their weapons. No one dared to speak until one finally broke the silence, his voice thick with emotion. "We can't take them from her. Not from this." As if on cue, the clouds outside parted, and golden sunlight poured through the splintered doorframe. The shepherds lifted their noble heads, their bodies finally at ease, as if sensing the long fight was over. Miles from there, Ethan stood at his window, watching the last of the rain. Streaks disappear from the glass, whispering to the empty room. She wasn't hiding them. She was honoring his memory. But the story was far from over. Because the secret hidden in the room below the floorboards was about to change everything they thought they knew about her father. When Ethan finally returned to the old house that afternoon, the authorities were long gone. Yellow caution tape danced feebly in the breeze, but the silence hanging over the property felt changed, now lighter almost. Serene, the officers had not seized the dogs. Instead, they had retreated in silence, leaving only a single note affixed to the broken door. "Under care of temporary guardian until further notice." Ethan gently pushed the door, inward stepping with care through the remnants of the raid. The smell of damp earth and dog was heavy, but underneath it lay another scent, faint yet familiar. The sharp tang of antiseptic and cold steel. He followed it down the narrow hall, to the very back of the house. There behind a teetering stack of boxes shrouded by a tarp was a wooden trap door. He dropped to his knees and swept aside a thick layer of dust. The latch was ancient, but it wasn't locked. With a deep breath, he pulled it open. A flight of stairs plunged into absolute darkness. He flicked on his flashlight and took the first step down, every groan of the wood echoing in the tomb-like air. What he found below stole the air from his lungs. This wasn't a shelter. It was a shrine, its walls lined with photographs, commendation badges, and certificates of honor. Shelves held medical supplies, bandages, and dog food, all arranged in perfect rows. But it was the object in the center of the room that froze Ethan in his tracks, a large wooden box draped with a meticulously folded police flag. Atop it sat a single-framed photograph of Officer Daniel Carter, smiling beside his K-9 unit, the very same dogs. Now in his daughter's care, Ethan knelt his gaze, tracing the words carved into the lid. For the ones who never left his side. Behind him, a footstep echoed. He turned. The little girl was standing at the base of the stairs, holding Bravo's leash. Her eyes were tear-stained, but steady. "I knew you would find us," she said softly. Ethan's throat tightened. "You shouldn't be here, little one. The storm, everyone's been so worried." She shook her head. "I had to stay. They get frightened. When it rains, my dad used to say the thunder sounded like the battlefield." She walked to the box, gently placing her hand on its surface. "He took these dogs everywhere with him. When he didn't come home, they were sent away. But they didn't belong anywhere else. They kept escaping until one night Bravo found his way back to me. I followed him and he brought me here." Her voice quavered, but her eyes remained dry. "This was my dad's sanctuary. He treated injured K-9ers here he trained. Them found them homes. I'm just trying to continue what he started." Ethan's eyes scanned the room, the medical instruments, the feeding, charts, the painted paw prints on the wall. She'd been caring for all of them alone since her father's death. "You've done all of this by yourself?" he asked, his voice hushed. She nodded. "He told me once, heroes don't always wear badges. Sometimes they have paws. I promised him I would never leave them behind." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes as he knelt beside her. "You've honored that promise more than anyone ever could have." For a long moment, a profound silence filled the basement one that held both deep sorrow and a quiet peace. Bravo rested his head on the girl's shoulder, and a faint smile touched her lips. Ethan whispered, "The world needs to hear your story." But the girl looked up, her expression resolute. "No, I don't want fame, I just want them to be safe." He nodded slowly. "Then I will make sure they are. I'll help you, kid. You aren't alone anymore." Above them, a sliver of sunlight pierced the cracked window, casting a golden ray across the photograph of Officer Carter and his loyal K-9S. And in that hallowed space, surrounded by memory and love, the fragmented truth finally felt whole. A daughter keeping her father's legacy alive, one faithful heartbeat at a time. The girl's voice trembled as she traced the image of her father. "He used to say that storms can't frighten brave hearts," she whispered. "But for us, that storm never really ended." Ethan remained silent, listening as she began to tell her story. The memory unfolded, her words breathing life into the past, as if the very walls held the echo. It was 2 years ago, the night before Officer Daniel Carter's final mission. The air was still, the sky outside, painted in shades of gold. Over their small home on the edge of town, her father sat by the fireplace, carefully polishing Bravo's leather collar. The other 4 shepherds were resting nearby, silent, loyal sentinels. The little girl sat on the rug, cross-legged, holding her stuffed puppy tight. "Daddy?" she'd asked. "Why do you have to go away again? You just got home." Daniel had offered a gentle smile, gently placing the collar aside. "Because, my sweet girl, there's someone out there who needs us. And when you're a K-9, officer, you don't get to pick the easy days." Her small brow furrowed. "But who's going to take care of them when you're gone?" He reached over softly, tucking a stray piece of hair behind her ear. "That's what I have you for." "Me?" she asked, her eyes wide. Daniel nodded. "If anything ever happens to me, I mean anything at all, you take care of my boys. You promise me that." Her little lip quivered. "But I'm so small." and he smiled that same gentle smile that was etched forever into her memory. Bravery isn't about size, sweetheart. It's about heart, and yours is bigger than anyone's I've ever known. He rose to his feet, gave a soft whistle, and the dogs snapped to attention in perfect formation. See them? They will never leave your side. They'll protect you, and you'll protect them. Is it a deal? She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Deal. Daniel leaned down, kissing her forehead. Good girl. The very next morning, the call came a hostage rescue that went terribly wrong. Daniel and his unit went in. Only 3 officers came back out. Daniel was not one of them. That night, as the little girl woke to the drumming of rain, on the roof she found Bravo waiting at her door, his fur soaked through his eyes, reflecting a deep sorrow. The other dogs were right behind him, each one carrying a piece of her father's life, his badge, his cap, his whistle. And from that night forward, she never once let them go. As the memory faded, a lump formed in Ethan's throat. The girl just stood there silently, tears glistening in the faint light. He kept his promise, she whispered, her voice trembling. Now it's my turn to keep mine. Ethan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You didn't just keep it, he said, his own voice soft. You became his promise. High above them, the photograph of Officer Carter seemed to glow in the flashlight's beam. A father and his daughter bound for eternity by courage, loyalty, and an unbreakable love. By the following morning, the story had ignited across the town. What had started as a viral curiosity about a little girl and her giant dogs had become something infinitely more profound, a truth that shook the community to its very core. Ethan had said nothing to the media, but a story this powerful couldn't be contained. The officers who were there couldn't hold on to the secret. By noon, the news crews were back on Maple Street. But this time their cameras weren't hunting for a scandal. They were searching for a hero. Neighbors who had once whispered from behind their curtains now stood on their lawns, the weight of their guilt etched onto their faces. Mrs. Keller from the bakery clutched a basket of fresh bread, her hands trembling. This time, she murmured, we just thought she was odd. We never knew she was continuing her father's most sacred work. A small crowd gathered on this corner, their silence a sign of respect. When Ethan pulled up, a sea of microphones turned his way. Is it true? A reporter called out. Was this little girl really caring for wounded police dogs all by herself? Ethan paused. Yes, he finally confirmed, his voice unwavering. And she did it with more heart than most grown-ups could ever hope to have. The story broke that evening. Every single channel, every newsfeed. Headlines blazed, 6-year-old girl carries on fallen officer's legacy. The daughter of courage, the child who saved our K-9 heroes. Old footage of the K-9 unit filled the screen. Officer Daniel Carter, laughing with his loyal dogs, training them, holding his precious daughter tight in his arms. The world watched, its heart breaking and mending all at once. The comments flooded in by the thousands. This brought me to tears. She is a true angel on earth. Her dad must be so incredibly proud and filled with pride. Donations flooded the local shelter, while heartfelt messages of support came in from across the entire country, and officers from neighboring towns volunteered to help care for the devoted pack. That evening, as the sun set behind the rooftops, Maple Street lost its cold, isolating chill. The very same neighbors who had once cast judgment now stood in a line outside the little girl's temporary shelter, their arms full of food, warm blankets, toys, and treats for her dogs. From the window, the little girl watched in silence, her small hand gently resting upon Bravo's loyal head. And for the first time in so many months, a true smile graced her lips, not of relief, but because she finally understood that she was no longer alone. Standing beside her, Ethan said softly, "You see, sometimes the world just needs to hear the whole story before it learns how to care. And that very night, the town that once cast her aside began to truly honor her. The little girl who transformed her loss into a lasting legacy and her silence into a voice that reached millions. The attention came fast, much too fast. Cameras, microphones, the constant flash of bright lights. It was overwhelming for a child who had only known a life of silence and shadows. For days, she bravely tried to keep up, answering endless questions, meeting officials, visiting shelters. But the immense weight of it all was beginning to crush her. By the end of the week, her small body finally gave way. It happened during an intimate ceremony at the station where the department was planning to honor her father's courageous service. She was standing right beside Bravo, her hand tightly clutching his collar, when her knees suddenly gave out from under her. Ethan lunged forward, catching her just before she hit the ground. Hey, I've got you," he stammered, his own voice trembling. The paramedics rushed to her side, carefully lifting her onto a stretcher. Bravo cried out in distress, straining against his leash, desperately refusing to let her go. The other shepherds immediately encircled the ambulance, pacing with frantic anxiety as the sirens began to scream. At St. Mary's Hospital, the waiting room quickly filled to capacity. Officers, neighbors, even strangers who only knew her incredible story from a screen, all gathered in shared, quiet worry. Hours crawled by. The dogs lay vigil at the entrance, drenched in the gentle evening rain, refusing to eat, refusing to rest. Bravo's head was pressed against the cold glass of the door. His devoted eyes never leaving the empty hallway inside. Ethan sat with them, his hand unconsciously stroking Bravo's thick fur. "She's a fighter," he murmured. "She's got her father's spirit." But his voice broke on that last painful word. Deeper inside, doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize her. It was pure exhaustion, dehydration, and overwhelming stress. Her small body had simply shut down, but even in sleep, her tiny hand refused to let go of the small pendant hanging from her neck, the one that held her father's police badge. As dawn broke, the sterile hospital corridors began to glow with a pale morning light. A nurse opened the main doors, stepping out to where the faithful dogs still waited. "She's going to be all right," she said with a soft smile. "You can come in now." And what happened next was a sight no one there would ever forget. 5 German shepherds, moving like shadows down the quiet hospital corridor, their tails low, their gaze locked on the one room ahead. The hospital staff stepped aside, with tears shining in their eyes as the dogs reached her bedside. Bravo gently climbed onto the bed, resting his chin right beside her hand. Her small fingers twitched, and then slowly her eyelids fluttered open. "Bravo," she whispered, her voice hoarse, but so incredibly warm. The big dog's tail thumped just once against the bed. From the doorway, Ethan smiled, his own eyes wet with overwhelming relief. "Welcome back, kid." Outside, the entire world was waiting to celebrate a miracle. But inside that quiet hospital room, there was only silence. A girl, her dogs, and the steady rhythm of a vow that had never once faltered. The early sun streamed gently through the hospital window, bathing the sterile white walls in gold. The little girl sat propped against her pillows, blanket draped over her shoulders, her small hand resting softly on Bravo's loyal head. The other shepherds guarded her feet, finally at peace, as if they knew the deepest trial was behind them. Outside, a crowd had begun to form. Reporters, police, officers, neighbors, and strangers who had driven for hours just for a glimpse of her. But this time it wasn't mere curiosity that had drawn them here. It was profound gratitude. Ethan entered the room, a warm smile on his face. "You've got quite a fan club out there," he said, setting a small velvet box on her nightstand. Inside lay a medal, gold, polished and engraved with her father's name. "They wanted you to have this today, for bravery, for compassion, and for incredible courage." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "For me?" Ethan nodded. "For you and for him." Moments later, the door creaked open again. A man in a decorated police uniform stepped inside. It was Chief Reynolds, her father's former commanding officer. His voice was heavy with unshed emotion. "Your father was the bravest man I ever had the honor of knowing," he said. "And now the whole world knows his daughter carries that same heart." He gently pinned the medal to the blanket covering her chest. The room fell silent, filled only with the soft sounds of quiet tears. "This isn't just an award," he continued, his voice thick. "It's a thank you. From every officer, every handler, and every canine your father ever trained." The little girl glanced down at Bravo, fresh tears welling in her eyes. "He'd be so proud, wouldn't he?" She whispered, her voice barely audible. Chief Reynolds offered a gentle smile. "Oh, he already is." Outside the hospital courtyard had been utterly transformed. Banners declaring, "Thank you, K9 heroes," fluttered in the breeze. As she emerged, her small hand clutching Ethan's, encircled by her loyal guardians. The crowd erupted into a wave of thunderous applause. Police officers raised their hands in a crisp salute. Children held up hand-drawn signs. One of them read, "Heroes never die. They live on in those who remember." For the first time, the little girl smiled, a true smile, radiant and unburdened. She shyly raised a small hand, waving to the very people who had once only spoken of her in whispers. Ethan leaned down. "You changed them," he said softly. "And maybe you've changed all of us." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Bravo let out a single deep bark, a proud sound that echoed across the courtyard. The applause swelled in response, and in that one moment everyone felt it, the spirit of Officer Daniel Carter watching from somewhere far above, so proud of his daughter, so proud of his pack. And for the first time since that awful night, all those years ago, Maple Street finally felt like home again. The applause gradually faded, but the powerful feeling in the air remained. The ADI kind of sacred quiet that follows something truly beautiful. The little girl stood at the heart of the courtyard, the sunlight glinting off the medal pinned to her blanket. Around her, the 5 German shepherds sat at attention, their devoted eyes fixed on her, as if they knew their solemn vow to her father was now fulfilled. Ethan watched from the sidelines, his hands tucked in, his pockets the ghost of a smile on his lips. He'd witnessed countless stories in his career, but none quite like this one. "You did it, kid," he whispered to himself. "You finally gave your dad his peace." A police band began to play, a slow, reverent melody that drifted across the hospital grounds. Chief Reynolds approached the microphone. "Today," he declared, his voice unwavering, "we honor Officer Daniel Carter, a man who gave his all for this city and for the daughter who carried his legacy forward beyond what any of us ever dreamed possible." A wave of applause swept through the crowd. Tears welled in the eyes of everyone, officers, nurses, neighbors, and strangers alike. Even the most hardened veterans fought to hold back their emotions, blaming the bright sun for the glint in their eyes. When the formalities concluded, the girl knelt beside her faithful companions, wrapping her arms around, each one in a tight embrace. Bravo pressed against her, his tail giving a soft, steady thump. "We did it, boys," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Dad would be so proud." Ethan came to her side, gently resting a hand on Bravo's loyal head. "You know," he said, his voice low and kind, "you've got an entire town in your corner now. So what's next for you?" She looked up at him, a small smile touching her lips, her eyes filled with a quiet, unshakable resolve. "No, I'm going to keep helping dogs just like them, the ones everyone else has given up on," she said. He chuckled softly. "Well, then I guess we have work to do." As they walked off together, the setting sun bathed the world in a warm, golden light. Her dogs trotted proudly before them, their shadows stretching long and deep across the pavement. 6 hearts all beating as one for one shared purpose, 6 souls forever bound by a single legacy. A camera would hold on this perfect fleeting moment, the small girl and her loyal pack vanishing down the familiar length of Maple Street. The very same road where this whole impossible journey began, but this time there were no hushed whispers of doubt, only a wave of love and admiration that followed her with every single step. Because in that moment everyone finally understood the truth. She wasn't just a little girl out walking her dogs. She was the daughter of a hero, the guardian of a sacred promise, and the living heart of every loyal soul who has ever waited for their person to come home. If this story found a place in your heart, please show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing. And let us know in the comments below where in the world are you watching from, because stories like this are a powerful reminder that heroes don't always wear a uniform. Sometimes they wear a collar, and sometimes they are guided by tiny angels in pink coats. Stay with us for more stories that prove a timeless truth, that love, loyalty, and unbreakable courage can truly change the world.